1 of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to take a call in these committee stages of the Child Support Amendment Bill. And as I told the House last night in the second reading, it's with sadness, really, that the Green Party continues to oppose this legislation. We absolutely support the goal of a fairer, more transparent child support system. But right from the get-go with this legislation, we found ourselves unable to support it because of a number of concerns that we have which have not been addressed by the Select Committee's deliberations on the bill. I think it's really important to ground this debate in the subject matter, which is, of course, the rights of children to be well supported and cared for when their family is going through difficult circumstances. By definition, to qualify for child support, children's parents or caregivers have been unable to reach an agreement about how to financially support that child. And that's not an ideal circumstance by any stretch of the imagination for any child. It's a time when children are likely to be stressed and vulnerable, and a time when it's absolutely important that the legislation and the scheme governing the support for those children maximises their best interests and seeks the best possible outcome for those children. And to take probably our most fundamental concern with this bill, Mr. Chair, is the fact that it fails to maximise the best interests of children, and it fails to take that opportunity to do so. We've heard from one of the previous speakers, Dr. Clark, about the efforts that the committee went to consider enshrining a commitment to the best interests of children into the purposes of the Child Support Act, and that would have gone a long way, I think, to alleviating the concerns that we as the Green Party have about this bill. Unfortunately, the attempt to do that was blocked by the government members of the committee, and even the attempt to have some further advice from officials on that point was blocked. And I think when we consider that, not even in the Child Support Act are we prepared to enshrine the best interests of children. We really have our priorities wrong as a parliament when it comes to how we're taking care of our kids. It's also, Mr. Chair, a missed opportunity to alleviate child poverty, and we heard from a number of submitters that the child support scheme could be improved in such a way that would actually benefit directly some of the 25% of New Zealand children who are living in poverty. For example, the ability for parents who are reliant on benefits to receive a passed-on child support payment rather than having that whole payment retained by the Crown as a means of offsetting their benefit. Additionally, the ability for the Crown to advance child support payments to families, even if the liable parent is late or behind on their payments, in order to ensure a stable and guaranteed income for the children and family, would have made a huge difference for thousands of children and helped to alleviate child poverty, and that opportunity has been missed, and that is a great shame, Mr. Chair. Now, to turn to what takes up the bulk of Part 1 of this bill, which is the new child support formula, and really this is at the heart of the changes that the bill introduces, we remain incredibly concerned at the complexity and lack of transparency of the new child support formula that this bill introduces. It's been acknowledged by officials to the committee in their advice to the committee that the new formula is much, much more complicated than the one it replaces. And the one it replaces is already reasonably complicated and already a source of friction for many parents to calculate their liabilities or their entitlements under the existing child support formula. That will only get worse under this bill, Mr. Chair, because the new formula is incredibly complicated. It introduces a huge number of new variables, and the upshot of that, I think, is that it will become basically totally impenetrable for the average parent to work out their own liabilities or entitlements under the child support scheme. They'd probably need to sit down with the advice of a professional accountant in order to be able to figure it out, and certainly without the help of without the full and complicated information required to plug in all the variables, they won't be able to do their own calculations, check the calculations that the system has spat out for them, and feel confident that the system is fair and transparent. That, I think, has a real potential to create new grievances between parents, because if it's felt by either a receiving or a liable parent that they haven't had a fair deal from the new formula, they really have no ability to go in themselves and check against it, because it's so complicated that it will be simply impenetrable for them. And that I think produces, Mr. Chair.
Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Produces a real weakness in the scheme that actually puts it at considerable risk. What we also heard from officials with regards to the new child support formula is that it's going to put IRD systems, both administrative and IT systems, under considerable strain. Now, we know that IRD's IT system is already creaking and groaning under the weight of what it has to administer, and we've seen recently in other legislation before this House regarding the student loan scheme that the system basically can't cope with the changes that are being introduced. And here again, we have an example of that with the child support formula. Because it's so complicated, it's going to require significant investment in that IT system for it actually to be able to administer and process the formula. And we know already that that whole system needs replacing. So it's a very inefficient use of resources to invest and we've heard from officials it will be about $91 million required to administer the new formula, when that whole system is going to need to be replaced soon anyway. And I wouldn't be surprised actually if it caused it was the straw that broke the camel's back and caused the system to collapse. Now, so significant are these problems that the introduction of this bill has had to be delayed by a year so that IRD systems can get up to scratch. And I think that tells you a lot about the readiness of the department to administer the new child support scheme. And it simply put is not a good idea to go ahead. So we have very fundamental concerns with that, with the cost to the taxpayer of an additional $91 million and a contingency of $28 million to even put into place the administrative requirements, the training of new staff, the IT systems to administer the scheme, and no additional benefit, Mr. Chair, for the children who are supposedly at the heart of the scheme. So we have very fundamental concerns about that. I finally want to turn my attention to the Minister's SOP, which is before the House, and the concern I want to raise with this is really a process concern, because, Mr. Chair, this legislation goes back a very long time. The consultation to begin to review and reassess the child support scheme goes back a number of years. There was a very lengthy public consultation process undertaken, a very lengthy report produced, and over several years this legislation has progressed incrementally. We also had a very fulsome process at the Select Committee when we considered this legislation. We took our time over it, as we heard from Dr Clark, largely because we had to spend so long trying to get our heads around the new formula. But we had a very lengthy process, and we had plenty of time for advice from officials about amendments to the bill, and indeed the Select Committee recommended a number of amendments. And yet here we have, at the last minute, with no advance notice and the amendment only available earlier this afternoon, changes on the floor of the House from the Minister, when in fact I believe he's had years and years and years to get this right and to put those amendments in place. So I think it's very unacceptable that this kind of last-minute process has been followed with those amendments in the Minister's SOP. Those are some of the reasons, Mr. Chair, that the Green Party has fundamental concerns with this legislation, that we opposed it at the first and second readings, that we will oppose it through these committee stages, and we will oppose it in the third reading. Thank you.
Call Paseta Sam Lutawinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, it's